When you look back now, how has have the last few years kind of met your expectations when it comes to development on Bitcoin? Like you had all these ideas, early on, the payment channels, 2012, 2013, and now we're almost a decade afterwards. Do you think that we've met those expectations as the community of Bitcoin developers, or has that exceeded your expectations or been underwhelming?
It probably wouldn't be true if I were to say that the expectations were exceeded, but for good reason. So a couple of years ago, we did not understand how central to the whole Bitcoin ecosystem the stability of it is. And so we were much more inclined to do some really big changes that would nowadays be seen as jeopardizing the security of Bitcoin, simply because there wasn't as much value behind it, right? There were not so many people relying on its stability and weren't as involved with the financials behind Bitcoin. Nowadays, it is imperative for us to maintain that stability for the sake of not just us, but for all of the Bitcoin users in the system. And so we came to realize that, we can't make these huge jumps anymore, and we have to adopt a very defensive way of developing Bitcoin. But we now have venues where we can experiment and where we can develop quickly, and where we can make these learnings and then backport them into Bitcoin. One of them definitely is the whole venue of off-chain protocols, where we go from a system where everybody has to agree on changes to the protocol to a system where you basically opt into experimentation, you opt into some more advanced use cases that you can build on top of Bitcoin. And if that fails, well, you opted into that experimentation, but the rest of the network isn't impacted. Whereas experimentation on the base layer is much more dangerous in that it actually has to be a global consensus, and any mismatch in the logic, any error there can be catastrophic. And so
Right.
I had some expectations about on-chain experimentation, but I had to learn the lesson that this is definitely not something that we should pursue lightly. And sadly, some of my own proposals were rejected quite early on, and that can be frustrating. And I can see many developers seeing Bitcoin as a slow and sort of it's a huge cargo ship, and you can't turn it around as quickly as you can some other chains, but that's for good reason, and that takes some time to learn, basically.
So do you think that by introducing things like Lightning, and now you guys are working on Liquid, do you expect that this will create a more vibrant developer community experimenting with new ideas and kind of like a flourishing of new Bitcoin ideas?
Absolutely. So one of the first sentences in the Liquid white paper was exactly that. Its aim is to create an experimentation platform for the Bitcoin blockchain without creating its own token. And we have been doing a lot of experimentation on Liquid. Look at confidential assets, look at confidential transactions. Segwit itself was experimented on Liquid first, before we then sort of proposed or modified it with the learnings that we had, and then backported it into Bitcoin, where it now enables some of these use cases. And like I said before, the whole venue of off-chain protocols, such as the Lightning Network, is a huge boon for experimentation, simply because we can carve out our own little sub-chain where we can perform our experimentations. And if something goes wrong there, it is isolated to that particular part of the blockchain, and there is no contagion to the rest of the blockchain. So that's that's a way for us to isolate and experiment and be really quick. And you've seen that experimentation a lot over the last couple of years, with a lot of people jumping in, proposing changes to the Lightning Network that would otherwise have taken years to push through to the blockchain.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of framing it. I guess there's also maybe another level where even within the Lightning Network, you're kind of like opting into different channels, and like if something goes wrong in a channel between you and someone else, it doesn't affect the rest of the Lightning Network either, right? Is there something
Absolutely.
to that structure?
Absolutely, yeah. Simply because the way that all of these off-chain protocols work is we basically freeze a certain part of the blockchain, namely the amounts that we put into the off-chain contract, be that a Lightning channel or a multi-party channel or whatever, and then we collaboratively agree on what happens with these funds. And so if anything goes wrong, these are limited to those funds. And yes, there can be many instances of these contracts, and each channel is basically a contract that is isolated from the rest of the network. But we can then create relationships among them by forwarding payments over them.